Another person. Now you make me feel guilty. Sorry.
Oh, when we're done, we're going up to
I'm not proposing. This video.
Good. The answer would be no. All right, couple quick questions.
She's right there.
A question about the financing for the power plants.
Right.
We've been seeing public authorities sell bonds to finance these.
I don't think we need to anticipate any real increase in public authority issuance of bonds. What we're talking about is private financing for energy systems, but really what permits many of these energy investments to go forward is the long-term contracts, because when the private investors go to the capital markets, they need to show a revenue stream that is, if not guaranteed, certainly stable, and that's what long-term contracts do. And the problem with both the volatility and the lack of certainty that derives from the absence of long-term contracts is you can't market the bonds, or you do it at a price that is so expensive they just simply couldn't finance the projects.
So no
It's going to cost the state and subsidize.
Negligible. We are talking about energy investments here that will be driven by the private sector, where we will create a regulatory environment at really no cost to taxpayers that will permit them to get the certainty they need both to finance. We will give the regulatory approval. The time frame makes it feasible for plans to get from the drawing board into the ground, and so we will get plans built. One of the major problems we've had is that there have been plans out there, some very good plans that would have either transmission and distribution ideas or generating ideas that simply couldn't get financed because there was a lack of certainty about the revenue stream. So that is what we're hoping to address, both on the regulatory side, on the revenue side, and we can make real progress.
Have you come any closer?
No, I mean, I think the reality is it's interesting. In other parts of the nation, there has been some chatter about nuclear construction. I saw just a few days ago there's been some funds put together. I think that the reality is there's simply no tolerance in New York State for additional nuclear plants. The other reality is that even if you began today a planning process for a nuclear plant, you wouldn't begin to get energy into the system, I think, until 2016. So the time frame for that is so enormous that it's simply not part of what we're talking about. We're talking about, as I said, 15% reduction by 2015, which is smart efficiency standards. It is remarkable what you can accomplish, and it really was an eye-opener for me when we did the litigation relating to efficiency standards in air conditioners. You don't think of them as driving the energy market, but because of peak pricing, what happens in a hot summer day, the need to put additional peak power producers online at that moment drives up not only pollution, but also costs, and the way the costs are then spread because the top price sets the entire market, it really forces an enormous cost to be borne by everybody. So we can do an enormous amount with efficiency.
Governor, you mentioned mayoral control of the school system. Are you just referring to New York City or every city in New York City?
The issue pertains most dramatically to New York City. That's where the statutory change occurred a couple years ago. But I've also spoken in laying out the education agenda back at the time of the budget. I said we needed to extend that to other states, other cities, where I wanted mayors to have the capacity to name certainly additional members to the school board so that they would be able to have an effect on policies that were being implemented and also be held accountable.
Governor, can you say why you decided to have this speech now? And are you aware of the fact that neighbors are making this speech about energy?
My sense is that I think Earth Day is around the corner, and so I think that is part of the reason that there are a fair number of conversations right now about it. But more fundamentally, the budget dynamic through April 1 dominated the discourse and drove certain policy determinations that were budget driven. Now we can begin to talk about policy areas that are not necessarily as integral to the budget. Energy is one that I've always said is central to driving the economy of the state of New York. Remember, I've always said we need to invest in our infrastructure. That means transportation, energy, and housing. Those are the three areas that I've said have been underfunded for many years because we have had essentially a consumption budget, a budget that has gone almost exclusively to other areas, healthcare in particular being the greatest growth area. So as we try to control healthcare, we can then begin to get investment in transportation, housing, energy, as I just said, is less a public investment area than a regulatory framework conversation, and hopefully we will make real progress here.
How can rates...
Look, until I see what the mayor proposes, I'm not going to react to it. As you just heard me say in another context, the mayor has been very creative and thoughtful in many of the things he has done. The last thing I'm going to do is reject anything out of hand. The other thing I'm not going to do is embrace it until I've seen it. So I think when the mayor comes forward with the transportation plan, obviously we'll look at it, give it real care and thought, and see what it means. Last question. Yes.
How can rates go down if investments are increasing and costs are increasing among the utilities?
Because the cost of production can go down given new technologies and efficiency standards will generate usage patterns that will permit us to have prices drop. And again, remember what I said, where the price is dominated by peak pricing. So on hot summer days, if you have more efficient air conditioners, for instance, total demand at that moment can be down. And the way the ISO bidding process works, you'd be amazed how a 10% drop in demand can have an absolutely dramatic impact on the drop on the overall cost of energy.
And this is Indian Point has 2 reactors actually. You talked about IP2.
Well, IP2 is the whole so.
Okay, so you just want to
Yeah. Well, as I said, contingent on getting replacement power.
Governor, did you just
Were you opposed to the renewal of the license?
taxes? Did I hear that
I
right?
said we're not raising taxes. Thank you, guys.